Welcome to all of our ISM members from the various chapters around the United States and guests joining us for today's program on the topic of value beyond savings. Please be sure to use the Q&A button or the chat function for any questions you may have for our speaker, as we would like to make this as interactive as possible. Today's speaker is Graham Crawshaw, and Graham is phenomenal. You're going to absolutely love this presentation. Who is the Services Director for CASME and is speaking to us from the UK today. Graham has the overall responsibility for the quality of CASME's Global Roundtable and Virtual Events program, which approximately is 200 events delivered per year. He is also a leading facilitator and procurement analyst and develops benchmarking activities covering a broad range of procurement categories and practices. Prior to joining CASME, Graham has spent 20 years working in procurement for the music industry within an operational and marketing environment. At EMI, Graham regularly supported major artists, including the Beatles, Queen, Pink Floyd, in developing and sourcing their unique packaging requirements, and subsequently worked on the company's first music streaming contract. Graham is a fellow of the Charter Institute of Procurement and Supply. At this point, I'm going to turn the stage over to Graham.
Excellent. Well, Kathy, thank you so much. And thank you for the invite. And you've sort of set expectations there. So I hope I can meet that requirement. Delighted to be here with you today to share some ideas. And we've got the Q&A box working, and there's the chat as well. So if anyone's got any questions, then please use that. And at the end of the session, I'll make sure that we'll attempt to cover all the questions that you've got. Now, I promise you, I hate death by PowerPoint, so I'm not going to use many slides today, but I do need something just to kick us off and also to share some of the ideas and benchmarking. So I think that you should be able to see that okay. So we're going to talk about value beyond savings. To set the scene, set the context, just let me have 3 slides to say why I think I'm qualified to talk about this subject. Kathy's already said at CASME, we're an organization, global organization, that we put on these events, and it's from these roundtables and panel discussions, and also from benchmarking that we carry out, that we've got access to a lot of information as to what procurement professionals are doing around the world. The sort of companies that I'm going to be sharing their responses, of course, all anonymously, you can see on the screen there. So I'm sure you'll recognize some of the logos. They tend to be large global players with procurement teams in different cities, different regions around the world. Also different sectors, recognizing that suppliers themselves can treat you differently depending on which sector you're working for. So I think it's very important to have such a mix of organizations responding to the benchmarking. But fundamentally at CASME, what is quite unique about what we do is the fact there are no sponsors, suppliers, or consultants impacting any of the information. So everything I talk about, all the data that I share with you today, has come from procurement professionals. There's no supplier, there isn't anyone with an ulterior motive. As Kathy said, I did a lot of work in the music industry, Capitol Records. I spent 4 years at Capitol Tower in Los Angeles. And when you work for a large company, there is nothing worse than going to a conference or event and suppliers pick on you because of the badge that you're wearing or the company that you represent. And so you always get that sort of pressure. I'm sure you can all fully relate to what I'm saying. So the fact that this information comes without that makes it very credible. So what are we going to talk about today? I want to share with you the conversation around value beyond savings. And I know it's a phrase that we use sort of quite a lot, but it is so important for procurement. So let me go straight into, I've got a chart that we have, a lot of companies, a lot of procurement professionals have contributed their ideas into the value beyond savings. Now, we know and understand that almost everyone has to do the cost savings. So many situations, people get their bonus or remuneration based on achieving a financial target. And so there is immense pressure to deliver the dollars. And that's the same wherever you are in the world for the majority of organizations. There are one or two that I know that don't have that as a priority, but they really are few and far between. For most organizations, the pressure there is on the dollar savings. But what is fascinating to see is the changes that procurement is going through. And I think they've started some time ago. Let's face it, it's not all brand new change. But when you think about it, every year that goes by, procurement is getting better credibility within the business. And a lot of negative, a lot of bad things have happened during the pandemic. But one very good thing is that procurement's profile has been raised significantly. And we've seen that. You only need to look at the press and on the television that procurement's got a mention, because over a year ago, almost 18 months ago now, we were at that firefighting stage, putting out fires, doing things, getting PPE, making it all happen. And procurement was recognized at doing a good job. So in fact, as we moved on, and as we've got to this summer that's just gone, I think one of the concerns is, can we maintain that momentum? Are we still keeping that profile such that the business recognizes the value that procurement delivers? And some say we've got to make sure we don't drop the ball. And there are different ways to do that. And I would actually suggest the biggest way forward is focusing on this value beyond savings. Just look at the list. What is quite amazing is the different number of activities that procurement is involved with. And I think the more I get involved with different procurement organizations, it just seems to be the breadth and the scope of work they're doing is so different from what it used to be. And in each of these areas, you can genuinely say, look, this really is an additional sort of value that procurement can deliver. Now, we know when you are focused on cost savings, this is how procurement gets a bit of a bad reputation. There's no question of it. People saw procurement as the cost cutters, the organization that did stuff that meant the business had its budget removed. So it was so difficult to actually get relationships with the business and stakeholders that was not negative or ended up with a negative impact. And so what we're saying is, look, put the cost savings to a side. Let's really focus on this value beyond savings. Now, I'm going to be talking for a little while, but believe me, you would not want me to cover off every one of those on that slide. Would be here for many hours because there is so much involved with them. So I'm just going to sort of talk through and pick a few that are really the hot topics that are going on at the moment. Now, of course, pandemic response has been something that's been going on for quite some time now. And most organizations have got it under control. But equally, we all know that as we've come out of the pandemic, we've hit this almost perfect storm of challenges where we're seeing issues around inflation, we're seeing issues around component shortages, We're seeing problems in terms of getting right labor, a whole series of things, which are just making life really sort of complex for procurement. And almost seeing beyond that is what I'm hearing many procurement organizations are doing. So yeah, working with the pandemic is definitely something that's very important, and making that clear to your organization, this is what you're doing. Working capital is definitely an area of value that you can deliver. And even where you have been required to help out suppliers because perhaps they're in trouble because, again, of the pandemic, what we've seen is a negotiation around working capital, perhaps introducing supply chain financing or invoice discounting, giving that opportunity to just to make a difference, get the objectives met that your company needs, but also being seen and being very favorable to your suppliers. Supplier relationship management. I forgot to say, didn't I? The size of the text is dependent on the number of people that responded. So the more people that responded to something, we made it bigger. SRM is the largest on the chart, as you can see. And the more we talk about supply relationship management, it is such a value to procurement. Without doubt, those companies that have got effective SRM programs in place have done so much better during the pandemic than companies that don't have SRM. So talking with your suppliers, we know procurement is all about the relationships and managing those relationships. And that essentially is just a great way to get beyond that cost conversation and then talking with stakeholders around that value, around the relationship that you've got. And by having that relationship, that then drives innovation to the business. One of the points that I mentioned just earlier in terms of the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, what's next? How do you maintain that credibility? Well, the benchmarking we've done demonstrates that innovation is the answer. Innovation all being about having those new ideas, the suppliers wanting to come to you with new ideas rather than going to your competitor. And ideas like that then make a great subject to be having the conversation with your stakeholders. Another one, sustainability. Well, we all know, again, I could talk about that for a very, very long time. Sustainability has hit us almost like a train hitting a brick wall. We've suddenly been thrust into that area of really wanting and needing to support the business on sustainability. Now, I know we've been doing corporate responsibility, we've done environmental issues, we've been doing that for some time, but globally, everyone has almost seen a gear change to really focus much more on sustainability. So you've got your company's investors, your company's customers, and also your employees all showing an interest on sustainability matters. And so what we've really understood is organizations that then have conversations with stakeholders purely focused around sustainability, then again, it makes so much of a difference because you're looking at ways of making improvements. And what we're seeing, and I've seen over this last 9 months, is moving away from the superficial type of projects or the easier projects to actively building in sustainability criteria to your RFX process, having a weighting that may be up to 20% of the evaluation. Certainly those leading companies are in that 15 to 20% bracket. Those that are less focused on sustainability, it may be 3 to 5% or even less. But sustainability is one of those conversations that you can have that excites your stakeholder and gets them on board. I'd see that as we go into 2022, sustainable procurement, they're going to be two words that are synonymous with each other. And I think it's very much the future. And it's great that because we manage all of those third-party relationships, procurement is very well suited to actually deliver and get engaged in those topics. There's some others there that you could see that, risk. Sorry, I was going to talk about risk, because risk management is another of those values that is becoming more and more important. And again, I saw through the pandemic, the list of risk factors that procurement is now getting involved with continues to grow. There's no question of that. Procurement is involved, whether it is the financial stability of suppliers, whether it's looking at bribery and corruption, or whether it's one of those other factors that need to be controlled. Many businesses are trying to get some tools or systems to help them do that, and it's still proving quite challenging to have in place. I mean, I'll be fascinated to know if anyone is being really successful at the moment in terms of they're managing risk through tools. My experience is that you're either overfaced with data from information or highlighting issues with suppliers, or it still doesn't capture enough of an explanation as to what might be going wrong with the supplier. But you know, if you're having that conversation with the stakeholder around risk, you're going to get their attention. So if you look at this collectively, and that's what I like about this particular chart, you've got a lot of activities that are going on that are going to get the ear of your business stakeholder, your business partner. And by the time that you've covered all of these, then actually, there's no need for that cost-saving conversation. But experience tells us that if you are focused on all of these value adds, then actually the cost savings happen anyway, because maybe your stakeholder is getting you involved earlier because of the credibility that you've got in place. Maybe you're having greater oversight of the spend or the areas that can be incorporated within a tender. So it really does make quite a significant difference having that emphasis on value beyond savings. And just to say, yeah, of course, we're going to share all these slides with you so that you can take a look, because I've got some other charts I'd like to share that's got a bit more detail on it. And I'm only going to pick on the highlights, not go through every single one, but you could use these as a cross-reference later, which I hope you'll find of benefit. We've done some additional benchmarking looking at the overall performance, the overall value that procurement can deliver to the organization, because I think you just need to track this in some shape or form, because you need to know whether you're doing the right things that are respected and required by the business. So let me run through, and I've got 2 or 3 slides that cover this. First of all, sort of metrics. So which financial metrics other than cost savings are being used to monitor procurement's performance? And as I said, this again is a global response coming from the majority of the 180 plus companies that represent CASME's membership. And I've just thought, what is also fascinating is that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, these challenges and these responses are very, very similar. I think what we've seen over the pandemic is procurement teams talking more to each other. Now, maybe they're using Teams or Zoom, but it's almost that everyone is working so much more in sync with each other, meaning that the challenges and the work that they're doing is also better coordinated. It is amazing the benefits that actually have come from the pandemic. When you start looking at the detail, it's been very turbulent, but nevertheless, it's forced procurement to work together, and it's enabled procurement to work better with the business. You see the elephant in the room. I hope that's an expression used in the US. Apologies if it's not. I'll reword that. If you look at the chart, you can see the biggest one on there is cost avoidance at 83%. And we can have another half-hour conversation on cost avoidance. It is so controversial. And I know companies that absolutely refuse to accept any idea or concept of cost avoidance. Other companies really like it. And of course, most are somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. I think you need to agree with your finance teams what is acceptable, whether they do recognize it. And I'm often asked, well, what is the formula? What is the way of calculating cost avoidance? There's a massive list. Some are more credible than others. So I think actually you need to work it out, knowing your business and the culture within your organization as to what really is considered the value that you've put into the procurement process there, rather than just trying to get a big number that then the accountants don't like because they can't see that falling through into the profit and loss account. But cost avoidance, absolutely massive one there. You could see some of the others there are more popular than others, and it can end up getting a bit complicated. A lot of people talk to me about this sort of the saving, the cost or the spend per full-time employee within procurement. And it's one of those metrics that sounds good. It sounds as if it should be easy to work out. It sounds as if it should be comparable with other organizations. But when we've tried to do it and get anything meaningful from it, you hit the challenge that different people work in different companies in different ways, and trying to work out, well, is that FTE included or not? Is it purely strategic or tactical? Where does that line draw between the two? So it can get very messy. So I'm not surprised that that was actually a very low response from many organizations. But nevertheless, this is the top, I think there's 10, the top 10 list. Make a comparison with your organization to see if any of these line up, and see if it is worth putting the effort in to capturing that metrics data. I've got another slide here, operational metrics. Which metrics, KPIs are actually being applied within your organization to really see how effective you are at delivering to the business. And interesting here, there's no massive response. It's almost that it's all split, and different criteria, different KPIs are important to different organizations. I mean, payment terms compliance, we know payment terms is a very emotive topic. I've already said earlier the importance of perhaps helping out the supplier as part of your working capital objectives. But keeping to that compliance is good to know, so that when you then negotiate with the supplier, you can be in a position of strength by saying, yeah, we always pay on time. Doesn't matter what the payment terms are. It's more your adherence to doing what you say you were going to do. Because we also know if you don't do what you say you're going to do, that's certainly a way to upset the supplier. Other companies are focused on measuring things like purchase order processing times, RFX times. Again, it's almost trying to move it more strategically, because you want to get away from the fact that the business says that you're too slow in processing it. There may be good reasons, there often are. There's often a misunderstanding of the due diligence activity that goes in before you can raise the order. So we're back to trying to elevate procurement, talking about areas of greater value than trying to measure and capture those KPIs, which really aren't going to help you that much anyway, I would suggest. Operational efficiency. So how efficient is procurement at delivering the value to procurement. And again, not going to go through all of these. You can take another look at another time. But it's like, how efficient are you at doing what you've got to do? And it's interesting that the chart shows where organizations are looking to gain those efficiencies. So no surprise that standardization and streamlining processes is number one. We're seeing many organizations have that as an activity of their center of excellence. And of course, that nowadays can be a virtual center of excellence with individuals all over the world. They've just got the right skill sets to bring together to be able to work and then support the rest of the procurement function. You see a number of those efficiency metrics looking at data and systems. Procurement still is struggling in general. I rarely have a conversation with a category manager that says, yeah, their system is coordinated, they've got access to all the data, the spend data, the other analytics that is so important and so helpful for procurement. It's often a big struggle to get that coordinated. And quite frankly, the larger the company, the harder it can be. Even if you're operating the same ERP system, if you've into acquisitions and demergers, then you've got issues of new companies coming in, will call things differently, have different setups, different standard accounts. And of course, so many of those systems are geared around the accounts general ledger rather than the data that procurement needs. So there is still a lot of challenges around that in terms of getting procurement to become more efficient. Strategic value. I'd seen procurement becoming more strategic year on year as each year goes by, and that's a good thing. Getting the tail spend under control, getting activities outsourced to make it so that you're much more likely to operate at a strategic level across the function. So working out the category plans and the longer term strategies. So we did this piece of benchmarking, and the question was, which of the following are being measured to evaluate procurement's delivery of value? And look at the number one there, supplier relationship management. So what I like about the way that we do our benchmarking is this consistent validation that whichever way you look at it, it confirms that activities like investment in supplier relationship management are definitely worth doing. And it doesn't matter whether your approach is to have SRM as a standalone organization that's separate from your category managers, or whether it's a role that the category manager performs. I've seen so many different models in place. It generally comes down to the culture of your organization as to whether you want a different skill set in terms of the category management versus the SRM activity. So supply relationship management, definitely number one there. And then number two is the whole risk management. So these hot topics that we've been talking about are the areas that this is where procurement is seen as adding value to the business, because the business wants to make sure that there are not going to be issues around reputational damage, shortages, lack of delivery. And again, because of the pandemic, that has become very much aware of different people, or different people are fully aware of what's going on in terms of the activities that procurement is doing. I will add consolidation of supply. It's only at 20% there. But what we've also seen is that because of all that's going on in terms of wanting innovation, managing risk, dealing and supporting sustainability projects, procurement can't do all of this with a massive supply base. And so what we have seen as a general trend is the narrowing down, consolidating of the supply base. And I think the good thing is doing it now, you're able to go to the stakeholder and say, look, because we're managing so much, we can't have a roster of 20 different companies, 20 different, say, marketing agencies or consultancy organizations. We need to reduce that list down. Now, when we did some very specific benchmarking saying which category should you start with, then actually business travel came out top. So the most volatile category, the category that's been through so much change because of the pandemic, is being responded to as companies look to consolidate, use fewer suppliers. And I think that's also demonstrated by the way that planning for travel for 2022, it's more likely that you want to negotiate with fewer hotel chains and fewer airlines. And here, the emphasis certainly isn't around cost. It's about traveler safety and providing flexibility and security. So a lot has happened as a result of the pandemic, and it's all about getting that value message across to the organization. I've got many more slides, I did promise that, but I like to use them to tell the story rather than just sort of read them all out. This is, how do you make sure that where you are delivering the value, that it's aligned to what the stakeholders want? And you didn't need me to do benchmarking to confirm this. It's like a lot of procurement, it's pretty obvious, but you've got to do it. The best way is when you're sat with your business stakeholder, defining the KPIs and the objectives that they are looking to achieve. But of course, you can only do this more advanced collaborative work if you've got the basics in place. And that's why all of these slides interlink with each other. You can't just have one aspect of procurement in isolation, but actually it's the build-up and the addressing of all of these areas of value that suddenly you tip the point, and the business then wants to have procurement heavily involved from the outset. So it's a fascinating combination, and I've seen it time and time again with organizations, that when they start on this journey, it takes time and it takes a long time to actually get stakeholders on board. But you get to that point that suddenly, yeah, they want you involved. They want you to share in their plans to help them achieve their objectives. And so it all nicely comes together. I mentioned at the outset, and I think this is the last slide, and I've thrown this one in, innovation. So what we're seeing is that innovation is going to take over from the challenges of the pandemic for many organizations. You've got to have something, so you might as well have innovation. Innovation all about bringing value to your company that you want for your organization, not sending it off to your competitors. So see it as competitive advantage. The reason I'm showing this is a lot of people ask me, how are you valuing innovation? And I've struggled with this. We've had lots of conversations over the last, however many years, because let's face it, innovation is a bit of a buzzword, isn't it? How do you value innovation? The worst thing you can do is try to divide up cost savings and allocate it. Oh, well, this is because we did the RFX. This is because we did an e-auction. This is because we've got innovation coming in. It just doesn't work. It's just on a downward spiral, and then you end up with KPIs of how many innovation ideas were delivered. Well, the suppliers manipulate it. They put ideas that aren't that significant, and it just gets really messy. Procurement at some point has got to be strong enough to say some things just can't be measured and a dollar amount assigned to them. So we did this benchmarking. I'm very pleased. Look at this calculation at the top. How many organizations say they're focused on a return on investment calculation? Excuse me. Only 8%. The reason being, it's almost impossible to do. And certainly to get anything that's meaningful, very, very difficult. Instead, focus on the communications that you're achieving through quarterly business reviews, continue with all that development and working with the supplier with a view to be able to perhaps put some case studies together. Let procurement start saying what a great job it is doing and use case studies to help you. Now, we know procurement is not known for saying it's done a fantastic job. I think we are generally embarrassed, but that's because all the conversations in the past have been about cost savings. And of course, it's embarrassing because you know that finance is then going to cut the budget for the business holder. So they're not really going to want you involved, and hence we go on that spiral down. But what I'm saying is that if you can talk about the innovation that's been achieved in a case study style, then suddenly you're getting that message across. And that's the same approach companies are now taking to get across their achievements on sustainability as well, and getting those stories that people can understand. So it's a complete mind shift change that those more mature procurement teams are able to do, getting that value added across to the business in different ways. And yeah, still report your dollar savings. You probably got to, but don't make that your emphasis. Those were the slides. Let me stop sharing now. I hope I've given you something to think about. Remember, I've said that none of that it's not Graham just making this up. It's all come from benchmarking and conversations with procurement professionals. So I promised I wouldn't talk for more than 40 minutes to give us time for Q&A. So I'm going to bring Kathy back into the conversation now, if that's okay, and then we'll start to look at some of the questions that we've got.
Okay, sure.
I need a quick drink of my coffee's gone cold.
Okay, we did get one. It's a comment that came in. I am in legal procurement consulting, and we are just starting to see this shift, mostly driven by the need to implement ESG programs, sustainability, diversity, risk management programs. Clients are asking law firms, what does your supplier diversity programs look like? What are you doing for sustainability and risk, et cetera? So procurement has been in the spotlight, trying to ensure that we can provide competitive responses.
Very good. Yeah, I mean, that's great to see. And I'm certainly seeing that the pressure on companies to have this information, whether it is for their customers or their investors, and also employees. There seems to be a shifting in balance that employees are wanting to work for companies that have got high and publicly stated strong credentials around ESG matters. And so the business needs to have those responses. And like you're saying, Stephanie, yeah, you've got to almost work out, well, where's that going to come from? Procurement. You're well positioned because you manage the relationships with the third party. We didn't talk as much about diversity, but that is again such a hot topic. And it is interesting because I know in North America you're much more mature and advanced on diversity than we are in Europe. You know, we're catching up. More and more companies in Europe are saying, look, we need our definition of diversity. We want that level playing field. We want the innovation that diverse companies can bring in. So I know this isn't a hot topics for 2022 conversation, but on my list there is the value that you get from diversity. And don't underestimate that. However, I would also add that the definition of what diversity looks like will be different in different parts of the world, and that's an interesting one. I think there's nothing wrong with that, but identifying suppliers that can really bring value, and that's why you're doing it. I think actually controversially, a fundamental difference between US and Europe is typically the diversity programs in the US are led because the company that's doing it wants to sell to government and therefore needs to provide that data. Whereas in Europe, diversity is seen as being an ability to attract innovation to the organization because there is no similar sort of government approach or government requirement to measure or monitor diversity. Really, really interesting subject that. So, so it's really good that Stephanie aligns with some of the things that we've been saying. So thank you.
Okay, we got another question in. Has
Yes.
any of the benchmarking, including public sector procurement, and if so, did you see differences between private and public sector responses?
Right, instant blunt response, it's 98% private sector. I think the CASME membership aligns more to private sector. Apologies for anyone that is in the public sector, but there just isn't that level of negotiation and flexibility that you have. I'm probably going to get shot for this now. Good job we're on Zoom, isn't it? But it is different. Public sector organizations don't have that same level of flexibility and need to demonstrate the value in that way. So unfortunately, or rightly or wrongly, this is very much a private sector perspective of procurement.
Okay, let me see. What companies can do to initiate implementing a diversity program for third-party vendors? Let me see, there's a little more to that one. What can companies do to initiate? It looks like it's the same question. What can companies do to initiate implementing a diversity program for third-party vendors?
Interesting question. I mean, I think, first of all, you've got to have an objective. Why are you doing it? Is it because your company wants to get government contracts, or have you got a genuine interest in a supplier that is classified as diverse? Now, I know in the US it's easier to identify those suppliers because there are registers that mean that all companies specify if they are classified as diverse. But so what can they do to initiate? How would you start? I would start by working out which categories are the easiest to bring in diverse suppliers so that you can then build up a bit of history, build up some success and say, look, we can achieve this for catering or office supplies or landscaping services. It tends to be in FM where it's an easier start. Then if you can do that, it's then easier to roll out to other categories. We're back to developing those case studies demonstrating value. And if you could say to the business, look, we've got this new idea, we've got this ability to be successful, we've got a small business involved because they're local, they can do this and that, then that's a feel-good factor. And actually, you're not compromising on cost. I think that's one thing with diversity. It's about getting that value rather than, because you're creating a level playing field, rather than just trying to sort of put pressure on suppliers to reduce their pricing.
Thank you. Okay.
Is that, I mean, actually, Kathy, you're probably better qualified than me on that one, being in, you're talking to the Brit here who has got a sort of a second-hand experience in terms of diversity. But I do think it is such it's an interesting and important topic. Once you have agreed internally what diversity means, I say in Europe, it tends to be much greater focus on women-owned and women-managed organizations and also ethnic minorities. Rightly or wrongly, veterans don't really ever count for very much at all. We just
Oh.
don't have that same status that you put veterans under in the US. It's just strange how culturally it is very different. If anything, the growth area is in LGBT owned businesses. That's also starting to be a factor. So yeah, that diversity, start with your definition and then get some success in certain categories and demonstrate, you know what, it really does make sense to support these suppliers.
Definitely it does. Definitely it does. Okay, we have another question in. What is the best way to resolve conflicts between two strategic values? Example, stakeholder relationship versus increased governance and compliance.
Good question, Augustine. You know what? I think my immediate reaction to that is you just got to talk to people. And I apologize, that sounds so straightforward, but the governance and compliance requirements are in there for a very good reason. And of course, they differ depending on which company you're in. If you're in pharmaceutical, you'll live and breathe this. If you're in financial services, it's still being developed and maybe not as mature as pharmaceutical. If you're in other companies, maybe that whole concept of cybersecurity, GDPR, the data protection is still at that early stage. I think it's down to procurement to be explaining to the business stakeholder the importance of getting it right. So actually, I don't see that it is a conflict, because I think you've got to, the two go hand in hand. With your business stakeholder, you're doing them a favor by protecting them, by saying our due diligence process has really made certain that you're not going to have an issue with GDPR. You're not going to have a concern that customer data is being moved out of the organization and that's prone to attack. And I think it's back to explaining, and I do often hear that you almost need a disaster, something going wrong, to then be able to have that story to say to the stakeholder. But they've really got to understand that you're not just taking time to get something done for the sake of. There is a good business reason why this governance and compliance activity is so critical, and better to be involved early, start the process early and get it right, than trying to mop up errors that have gone wrong later on in the process. Would you agree with that, Kathy? Is that something that, yeah, we can't have, it can't be a one or the other, because it's got to be understood why both is so important.
Thank you. Thank you. I did notice that, Julianne, you have a hand raised. Not sure if you wanted to ask a question live or if you did that by mistake. If you want to just put something in the chat so I know whether or not to let you ask the question live. But Graham, we were talking earlier before we started about some of the trends for next year. What are you seeing out there?
Oh yeah, it's the time of the year, isn't it? It's coming up to the holidays, as you call them, Christmas as we call it, and it's a time for looking forward. And I don't know if anyone was on the call now. I did this this exact same webinar with the CPO of Johnson & Johnson about 5 hours ago, I think it was, and we were looking at what are those hot topics for 2022. Top of the list are supply chain, if I get my teeth in, supply chain challenges. Try saying that way. Good job I didn't have that beer we were talking about, isn't it, Kathy? Supply chain challenges, then linked with issues around inflation and also risk management. So the inflation one's an interesting one. And we were saying that, I mean, Len's probably similar age to me, but you've got a whole team of young professionals that have entered into procurement over the last 10, 15 years, and they've not been used to high levels of inflation. And therefore, they're not used to the way of negotiating when the price has to go up. And in fact, we were talking earlier that so many contracts that we do in indirect are based around labor, and labor costs in general are increasing for all sorts of different reasons in different parts of North America and also in Europe, I hasten to add. And so you can't just ignore those increases, because you'll have suppliers that won't want to supply you. You'll have uncompetitive, dissatisfied contractors. So you need to manage that. But you also need to ensure that you're not being taken advantage of by suppliers hiking up cost based on inflation. I mean, we're looking at figures up to 5, even 6%. Now, the question I was asked, and I wish I had an answer, was, is it going to stabilize down? We've spoken over in this session about the firefighting and the pandemic, the moving forward, building the credibility and getting innovation as the way forward to maintain that credibility. Well, what's going to happen with inflation and costs and prices? Is it going to stabilize out? I don't know. When I was having this similar conversation in August, the view was that actually by January, February, it should have stabilized out and inflation will start to come down. The shortages will go away. I'm not convinced. I think it's going to take longer. I think this whole pandemic, I mean, in the UK, we've had further restrictions placed on us last night by the government, insisting everyone works from home where they can to avoid the infections of this Omicron variant. So it's not gone away. We're all being boosted, and that's with the vaccinations, and that's really helping. But the overall implications are still there. So whilst there is that uncertainty, I can see inflation being an issue throughout 2022. But so the other issues around managing your supply chain and then risk. I think also I will add that the exciting element is that work on sustainability that people are going to do. The fact that businesses can't just treat it as PR. They can't just treat it as some sort of thing to do to keep the communications department happy. It's fundamental. It's becoming much more fundamental of reviewing what you're buying and really questioning, not just is it sustainable over the next 6 months or even the duration of your contract, but actually what's the long-term outlook? And we probably do need to be thinking more long-term than we have been. So yeah, I would have that as the main challenges that we're all going to be working on in 2022.
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about the sustainability. We did a program probably a few weeks ago, and it was more or less, you know, you have a sustainability plan, but you got to do it.
Yes.
You got to put it.
It's not a choice, is it now?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a choice. And I think the two last few comments, mindful of time, the two questions I always get are sustainability. Yeah, we know about it, we've heard about it, we've attended conferences, but what's the scope? What actually are you including? Because there's so much to do. And then the second question is, where do we start? And again, it's like, you can't do everything. And those companies that are being more successful in their sustainability journey are those that have tackled relatively small projects, but they've communicated well within the organization how effective they've been. So whether it is LED lighting, whether it's configuring or changing your packaging to just to reduce the flute on the corrugated or get more on a pallet, it's letting the business know that a lot of the good work you are doing, and maybe you've always done it, but now position it as this is a sustainability objective that we're working towards. We're back to that value. It really is a good one, and that's going to be with us for quite some time, which is exciting.
Definitely, definitely. We did get a question. Oh, yes, we will be sharing the slides, so don't worry about that.
Yes, you've got those. Have I sent them to you, Kathy, or?
No, not yet, but
Oh, okay. I definitely will. Then you can, because I didn't want to go through all the numbers on that. You can take a look at those. And if anyone ever has any questions, then please reach out to me. I'm an avid user of LinkedIn. So if we're not connected, and it was great, I connected with David just before joining today, but it's a great way of communicating. And I'm a great ambassador for procurement. And my preferred area is bringing talent into procurement. So getting individuals that perhaps are still deciding what they want their career to be, rather than say, well, they want to go into accounts or marketing. Why not have students from university saying, yeah, I want to get into procurement. It's a great place to be. And if anything, it's improving, because where else can you be so involved with every aspect of a business and make so much difference and the value that you can bring? So that's my personal mission: get people to want to be in procurement from the outset of their career. Maybe then go into other functions, that's fine, but fundamentally have that eagerness to want to be part of procurement.
thank you. That's very well said. Well said, Graham. Well, we are out of time. We are out of time, and I want to thank our audience for attending today. And this is being recorded, so the recording will be made available a little later on today. So we're very quick on doing that as well. Well, I want to thank you, Graham. I want to wish everybody a great holiday as well. And hopefully we'll see you on our next program. Actually, we do have one more program next week. We're doing our Voice of Supply Chain and with our host, Sarah Scudder. So hopefully everybody can join us for one last program before our 2001 program series is completed. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon, great evening, Graham.
Thank you, Kathy. Great to be here today. Thank you all. Goodbye,
Okay,
then.
take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.